Sister to sister with Nothing Is Going to Bring Us Down Now. And welcome back. It is the Country Viewpoint here on your Colour of Country Life, Flow FM. I caught up recently with Zachary Whale. He's the General Manager for Policy and Advocacy at Grain Growers. And the main theme of our conversation is the Peak Body's pre-budget submission, where they are calling on federal budget support. And there's a number of issues that have been outlined. One of those is the state of infrastructure. So we'll go now to the chat I had earlier on with Zachary Whale.
It's a really important issue. The last couple of years with wetter than usual conditions has really led to a great deterioration almost across all of our road networks, wherever you are in rural Australia. And it's highlighted that there's actually a lack of funding often for local governments to repair and remediate their part of the network. And we're hearing more and more that when the repairs are happening, they're happening at breakneck speed, which is great in some senses because you want those roads functional again, but they're being repaired to the same standard, which means the next time we have a wet event or quite quickly they will deteriorate again. So what we're really speaking about here is how do you get an uptick in funding so that we can actually get these roads repaired and get the network up to scratch, but in a way that actually means the road network's going to be more resilient over time. We often talk about first and last mile funding. It's absolutely critical. Growers produce, hopefully, big crops. That's part of the game. Then they've actually got to get it, to a receival site or to a port so that we can get that food to a domestic customer or, in some states' cases, get it on a boat and to get it to an international customer. So roads are absolutely critical. And these wet years have just meant we need to increase the investment so that they can be repaired and not just repaired to the same spec, actually improve so that they're going to be more resilient. And in the long run, that'll actually cost less. We all know that if you fix something properly, that's going to last longer and service for longer than if you just do a quick and dirty job and to get the roads open again.
So this proposed sum of $1 billion, it's not a small amount of money. Obviously, this is being proposed so that, we get more of a immensely sort of nationwide look at, repairing roads for the long term rather than just sort of replacing roads with potholes and trying to get by as narrowly as we can, right?
Yeah, look, absolutely. Road funding is a complex beast, and as you'll appreciate, it's a mixture of both state and federal funding, and it also impacts on all levels of government, from federal, state, and local. So the funding, the nature of road funding is quite complicated. But specifically what we're wanting here is funding to flow through to local governments to help them do their bit, and also things like improving bridges. Often an ageing bit of infrastructure like a bridge is often the weakest part on a road network. So you might actually have a part of the road network that can handle high volumes and can handle high productivity vehicles, but if you've got a bridge that is older, you actually need that bridge to also be renewed so that we can get maximum productivity. So, as our crops get bigger, as our exports get larger, we actually need to get those higher productivity vehicles moving through the network. And in a lot of instances, aging bridge infrastructure, is the linchpin, is the cornerstone. And if we can get that part of the network upgraded, then you actually really lift productivity. So, look, it's a few things. It's not just local funding, it's also bridges. And it's also, as I said, improving the long-term, resilience of the network. This is right through from small local government roads right up to those big freight corridors, and it's also the bridges. But I don't think I have to say much more to convince people that, without that critical infrastructure being up to spec, it's really, really hard to get the productivity out of the network that we need.
Zachary Whale from Grain Growers is very eloquent. He's going to be telling us plenty more after this break. You don't want to go anywhere. You're listening to The Country Viewpoint. Amy Shark's song, Only Want to Be With You, and welcome back. You are listening to The Country Viewpoint here on Flow FM. Well, I caught up recently with Zachary Whale. He's from the Peak Body Grain Growers, and we're talking about a range of different issues relating to the pre-budget submission that has been put forward by grain growers in their call for federal budget support. So let's go back now to that conversation.
What the COVID-19 pandemic really illustrated is that our supply chains are incredibly long. And if you have big disruptions in those supply chains, whether that's local, port disruptions disruptions here in Australia, or whether it's actually a supply chain shock or a hurricane in another country, or if it's a domestic, gas issue that might happen in another country, that stuff all trickles down and impacts on Australia. And farming is contingent on inputs. It's contingent on seed, fertiliser, chemicals, and as you mentioned, spare parts. So there's an inherent benefit in making sure that Australia has some resilience and that we have as much produced here as possible. And it's not everything. I think we're really open to the fact that it's a global economy. We need different things to come from all over the world, but we also do need some fallback option. We need some domestic manufacturing capability here in Australia, and we think that it's in the agricultural interest and the national interest for some of that to increase. So the government and previous governments have had different funds that have actually tried to make sure we can maintain some of that manufacturing capacity in Australia. And with things like chemical formulation and fertiliser production, that's critical for agriculture. So we don't want, it's not just about the space industries or the aeronautical industries. We don't want governments to get, there's also a role for domestic manufacture for agriculture.
And Zachary, your employers are also calling on the implementation of a national biosecurity strategy, as well as establishing a sustainable funding model for biosecurity. We are hearing less and less about the threat of foot and mouth disease, but it very much still is a threat. Has that been much of a driving factor in the inclusion of this in your pre-budget submission?
Absolutely. So a couple of things have happened in parallel. The federal government rolled out a biosecurity strategy last year in 2022, and that was under the umbrella, or I probably should say under the shadow of quite a lot of fear around things like lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth. And that really put the ag sector on notice and really made people sit up and pay attention to biosecurity risks and what we can do at all levels to ensure that those risks are mitigated and that pests don't, come in to Australia and decimate our industry. For the grain sector specifically, our biggest plant pest is Capra beetle, and that is being detected more and more. It's travelling around on the high seas more and more. So we've got to make sure we're managing that threat. So this ask is about making sure that there is sustainable funding in the system, so that the system is resourced to tackle these challenges head on. Historically, it's been a little bit piecemeal, and that some of the biosecurity funding has come through in each budget cycle, and that can lead to uncertainty in the system. So this is about, don't just fund it one-off, don't just fund it each budget, actually create a sustainable funding mechanism so that the system is going to have funding and it's going to be able to adequately prepare for these risks, because the last thing you want is an incursion knocking on your door and that the system isn't prepared for or adequately resourced to tackle it. Biosecurity, might be less in the media spotlight today than it was a few months ago. But I guarantee as goods move around the world more and more, the risks are likely to increase.
Zachary Whale making himself available for us today. He's the General Manager of Policy and Advocacy at Grain Growers. Still to come today on the show, we'll be hearing from Anne Ruston, the Federal Shadow Health and Sport Minister, and also Michael McCormack, the former leader of the Nationals from the Riverina. That is all coming your way soon. Don't go anywhere.